tonight is Miss Jeanne Davern. She is managing editor of Architectural Record. She graduated from Wellesley College. She worked for several years for a small-town newspaper. She went to work for Architectural Record in 1948 and was made managing editor in 1963. She is one of the best-known representatives of the architectural magazine field in this country. I see her most often at AIA conventions, but I have to admit that it's rather hard to see her in a stand-up cocktail party. When we were in Columbus today, I think the kids in Gunnar Birkert's school down there might say that we were the long and the short of it. They asked me how tall I was, and people don't usually do that. I think it was in contrast to Johnny. So I would say that she is one of the most important people in the architecture magazine field today, and I think we're very fortunate in having her here to speak to us tonight on the future of architecture. Jeanne Davern.
That step was intended more for someone of Dean Sappenfield's height than mine. Let me begin by saying that I'm absolutely delighted to be here, having been hearing from Dean Sappenfield about the new School of Architecture at Ball State University before there even was one, and when it was only a dream, and that I'm delighted to be in Indiana. I think you're all very fortunate as future architects in this state to inherit so much beautiful, unspoiled landscape, along with the problems you inherit in the towns. But on that drive from Columbus today, we saw some of the most beautiful landscape I think I've seen in this country. And I hope you will all learn to lead the people of your state in taking good care of it in future years. My real subject tonight, which is the urgent subject connected with the future of architecture, I believe, is the new scale of architectural practice. The crucial challenge to the creative energies of your generation of architects will be found not in buildings per se, I believe, but in the development of new concepts of architectural service to respond to the new scale of human needs. Mies and Wright and Corbu and Gropius had to fight for the very idea that architecture related to the real needs of real people. Standing on their shoulders, the present generation is challenged to solve problems they could only dream of. But your generation will have a greater challenge still. It must learn to use design as a tool for defining problems as well as solving them, for setting goals as well as achieving them. This is the critical meaning of the new age of architecture. Not only must architects continue to provide appropriate solutions to problems their clients set, They must learn to help clients and non-clients at every scale, up to city, state, nation, and humanity itself, to analyze the problems and to establish the goals. The new age of architecture, let me emphasize, is not a prediction. It is here. The great change in the attitude of the public toward its environment has created new design problems at a scale which so far has only dimly been grasped, and new kinds of clients for whom social problems are paramount. It has also made the non-clients from whom tomorrow's commissions may come more important to architects than ever before. The time of passive acceptance by the public of unacceptable environmental conditions is clearly over. And for the first time in history, it can fairly be said that there is a conspicuous public demand for design to improve the human condition. In this new age of architecture, the scale of the central architectural problem is urban and social, and every indicator supports the prospect of ever-increasing urbanization and a higher proportion of building activity based on public rather than private demand. It is not a question of whether we want it that way. It's a matter of how it's developing. The great question is whether architects will continue to be the prime doers of architecture in the new age of architecture. Their competitors multiply as the opportunities multiply, and their competitors are getting smarter. When industry organizes its vast resources to the purpose of solving human environmental problems, and this is an extremely significant new trend today, architects must ask themselves how they maintain their leadership in the face of really stiff new competition. All this should not suggest that design is any less central than it has ever been to architecture. Indeed, it implies a larger, more critical, and more comprehensive role than ever. It does suggest the need for a degree of innovation and creativity in the management of architectural practice, which until now have been focused largely on design. A new scale of architectural practice is developing which will require new kinds of preparation and training from school through the lifetime of an architect if he is to be capable of exercising the new kinds of architectural influence. Design of buildings will in fact stay in the hands of architects only if they learn how to participate constructively in the social, economic, and political processes through which problems are identified and defined. Only if architects prepare for the new responsibilities will they continue to be the prime doers of architecture. New kinds of competitors are appearing almost daily, industrial giants like GE or BF Goodrich, which hope to create a new market for building products by acting as developers for new communities they will create staffs to design. Space contractors like McDonnell Aircraft, which need to create a new market for the space capabilities they build up for the space program. The resources of American industry are vast, and its experience with systems analysis as a tool for complex planning problems is by now considerable. Industry could become a formidable successor to the package dealer as the architect's most worrisome competitor. Surely the only effective answer is for architects to learn to use and control all the new tools, from financing techniques to computers to systems analysis and many others, but in the way of creative professionals only as tools for the expression of the human purposes they must learn to discern and interpret. I believe these circumstances are significant to architectural education as they are to practice, and that as architectural students, you should ask yourselves while you are still in school whether there are not some new architectural roles in which you want to start equipping yourselves to serve. The new roles are certainly emerging, and they need you. As an editor, I am particularly conscious of one major need, which I am convinced offers a major new opportunity for creative service, and I should like to talk in some detail about that. In the new age of architecture, the ability to communicate becomes the essential prerequisite to participation. And architects have never been effectively trained in any of the techniques of communication except architectural drawing. The architect who communicates effectively with his client is self-taught, and the architect who communicates effectively with the public is so rare that most architectural communication with the public is done by non-architects. As new kinds of clients emerge with new kinds of problems, there is a great and growing need for architectural communication to be developed in techniques which respond to the interests and the social and intellectual capacity to respond of those clients. As new kinds of competitors begin to apply sophisticated communications techniques from outside the world of architecture, there is a great and growing need for architectural communications techniques which are equally sophisticated and more informative. As non-clients become more and more influential in their impact on public policy, which in turn comes to establish a more significant part of the architectural climate, there is a great and growing need for architectural communications techniques which are a constructive response to the new public concern with environmental objectives. As governments, local, state, and federal, become more and more involved with environmental problems, there is a need for architectural communications techniques which will give architects an opportunity to participate in the development of all the policies which affect environmental matters. I submit that architects can no longer afford to leave architectural communication to non-architects, and that there is an urgent need for architects who are trained in communication skills to serve as architectural interpreters in the new age of architecture. They are needed as reporters, editors, columnists on newspapers and magazines. They are needed as television and radio commentators. They are needed as publications and public communications directors in architectural offices. They are needed in public service at all levels of government. Indeed, they are needed as communications coordinators by the American Institute of Architects and by all of its components. This creates a serious new obligation, in my view, for schools of architecture, which should develop new programs for training all their students in the essential techniques of communication, and for training some students as architectural communications professionals. There is also a new obligation for the profession, which should develop new programs to help its members in practice improve their communication skills, as well as their understanding of the new opportunities for their use. I am aware that the curricula of architectural schools are already crowded by new pressures that must seem endless, both to faculty and students. But now, as the Princeton Project leads a great effort to evaluate educational needs of the future for the profession, I believe serious consideration should be given as to how the architectural schools could contribute to educating architects to fill a serious communications gap. At the same time, I think some students might be considering architectural communication as a great new field of architectural service, and that some at least might be asking themselves whether their particular abilities and talents do not suggest deliberately preparing for it. Why should architects be especially prepared for a communications role? Well, let me say candidly that in my observation, architects are generally inept at public communication. They have never learned to use the common tongue in talking about architecture, and they talk to the public as though they were talking to each other. The result is that their listeners all too often hear something quite different from what architects think they are telling them. Words, which count for a good deal in public communication, are not the architect's normal mode of architectural communication. He must be taught to use them. And what is written and said in the public media about architecture seems to me not only far too sparse to respond to the present degree of public concern, but extremely unfortunate in most cases from the point of view of really informing the public about the role of architecture in matters that really concern the public. While more space is devoted these days to architecture and the public press, the space is too often given to a kind of so-called architectural criticism, which treats architecture as though it were history or sculpture. The new age of architecture must produce interpreters of architecture as a social art. I believe that a good deal of what is written about architecture in the public press diminishes rather than enhances the public image of the architect. And this is true to an important degree because the writing about architecture and the television comment is done by laymen or by art or architectural historians termed architectural critics, and is not done by architects. Architectural background alone is not enough, however, for effective communication with the public about architecture. I think it is hard for architects to accept, but some basic techniques of writing and speaking to the public interest must be mastered as well. Architects love to talk about architecture to each other or to those who understand the language. They must learn to be equally articulate and equally eloquent in the common language of the people they must seek to serve. For this, they need training, whether or not they plan to make a profession of architectural communication. Let me offer, at least for consideration, some specific suggestions. Unencumbered as I am by any specific knowledge of curriculum problems. First, every architectural school could require a year of English, written and spoken, for every year of architecture school. It should not be taught by an architect. I'm sure this idea bores you to tears. It's very revelatory of the problem. Second, every architectural school could have a publication directed to the public of its area, to which all students could be required to contribute in some way, editing, writing, design, management, or whatever, developing some basic background of experience in the problem of communicating with that general public. 3, every architecture school could have a program of visiting lecturers in various media of communications, editors of general and news magazines, as well as architectural magazines, newspapers and wire services, top public relations executives. Every architecture school could make public service a part of its curriculum by requiring talks about architecture in area public elementary schools. Schools are always after vocational speakers, as a part of the English-speaking curriculum. Requiring, as I gather in an exhibit that I have not yet seen, but I look forward to seeing tomorrow, you here have already done in Muncie, in what I'm told is a very intriguing exhibit, requiring students to analyze local or area environmental problems as a basis for developing programs for design assignments, developing a liaison with responsible local groups and offering student teams as a resource for them, for the students, the school problem, for the local groups, a research resource. And for those who were to become architectural communications professionals, why should there not be such special programs as master's programs, providing a 1 or 2 year course beyond the B.Arch degree in publications, television, and public relations techniques? Fellowships in architectural communications to help support such programs and to build their prestige. Internships in architectural communications. They might also be supported by fellowships. To offer experience, perhaps in 3-month increments on magazines and newspapers, in architectural offices, and in public service. These might be timed to occur at either of 2 stages, one before the final undergraduate year, or to assist a decision about the master's work, or second during the second master's year to provide field experience in various aspects of communications. But if all the circumstances I have been describing are the present conditions of architectural practice, and there is a need for architects trained as managers and policymakers, as well as, or rather than as, designers, how can inspiring architects get this kind of training? Not in most schools at present, and not in the drafting rooms of most offices at present. The solution, I would guess, must come out of some new kinds of collaboration between schools and offices, perhaps some new forms of office internship for architectural students, and some new kinds of seminars given in the schools by practitioners. And such efforts will be solidly based only if it comes to be accepted without prejudice that the skill of the creative architectural manager and the skill of the creative architectural designer are often not to be found in the same individual, and that both are worth nurturing. In a few adventurous new schools and a few adventurous older ones, this problem is being recognized in special options in later years. And in a few far-seeing architectural offices which recognize their need to grow to the new scale, the problem of how to make architectural management serve architectural design is being taken up in organized educational programs for partners and staff, as well as in a serious experimentation with ways of organizing a comprehensive design process. But such existing efforts are far too few in an architectural time that simply will not stand still. Now, still on the subject of how to prepare for and get into practice at the new scale, let me offer you some comments from practitioners in response to questions from me as to what advice they would give the architectural graduates of 1971 and beyond on how most effectively to approach the problem of, one, using the pre-registration years, and two, starting an architectural practice at the scale of the new needs. The excerpts I have selected come from a group which is extremely varied, both in character of work and size and type of firm, as you will see. But there is a remarkable community of concern about the changing scale of architectural practice. Ezra Ehrenkranz of Building Systems Development in San Francisco, I think that the area in which today's graduating students must be prepared to work is in terms of creating a market for their own services. Frequently, the reason that projects are not posed appropriately for us to have an opportunity to deal with them in terms of appropriate scale is the fact that our traditional clients are not operating in this scale. As in the case of SCSD, School Research Program in California, our work was predicated on developing a new type of client in order that we could solve some of the school problems. I think that the profession will need young people of vision who will not sit back and wait until society or a patron says, "Solve my problems," but who will become active in a politically vital manner to help structure society in such a way that institutions are developed at a scale which can then commission architects to solve major problems. Ulrich Franzen of New York. My suggestion as regards advice to the new generation of architects is that know-how is never as important as know-what. There is a long period of somewhere between 10 and 15 years from the time of graduation and the time when a young architect assumes responsibilities of consequence. He must be able to sustain himself as a thinking architect during this period. The ability to think for himself and the ability to visualize his ideas are the important things. Wallace K. Harrison of Harrison and Abramovitz, New York. The architect must find a way in the expanding field of building where he can plan great things without being stopped by men who know less than he does. That might be worth saying over again. The architect must find a way in the expanding field of building where he can plan great things without being stopped by men who know less than he does. John Johansson. I believe my generation is the last in which it was possible to start with houses and before your career was finished, end up in urban design. Assuming they have a general comprehensive background in architectural school, they will immediately want to specialize not only in scale of design, but in aspect of architectural service. Some of these aspects would be computer graphics, design programming, advanced environmental studies, proxemics, a study of man and space, and other interdisciplinary research. I can see continued study and research after architecture school, a return to study and research at any time within an architect's career, and as change becomes more and more rapid, unlearning and relearning and unlearning and relearning within a career. Charles Ness of Baltimore, the immediate past president of the Institute, it is difficult to tell a student of the frustrations that he will have in the profession after leaving college. His designs will be so circumvented by budgets, laws, zoning, codes, politics, and so forth. It is also difficult to tell some of the educators that at present not only designers, but men skilled in many talents are required in a complete architect's office. Indeed, while I hate to say this, the day of small offices appears to be numbered, as most significant work is getting to be very large. It involves campus planning and entire cities and so forth. I would hope that eventually a normal degree would be given at the end of 4 years, and that specialization into design, office management, planning, landscape architecture, even engineering, might come during the final 2 years. I am also hoping that both architectural and engineering schools will give similar basic courses for the first several years, particularly for those engineers who want to enter the building part of engineering. Some schools seem to be planning a year's sabbatical leave after the 3rd or 4th year, this time to be spent in an architect's or engineer's office. Another hope I have is that our licensing examinations would be changed to permit design, site planning, and history to be taken either in college or immediately following graduation, and these examinations given by the colleges rather than by a registration board. This would allow the student to concentrate during his pre-registration years on adapting himself to the terrible real world. Today's generation of students is learning that questions are more important than answers, that process is more important than product, that the architect is more than a form giver, and that architecture is more than a series of individual monuments. Gio Abada of Helmuth Abada and Kassebaum. I still feel very strongly that after going through undergraduate school, a student is helped a great deal by going to another school for his master's degree. After graduate school, I think it is important to pick the kind of office where there is an attempt to solve problems in a meaningful way. I think it's important to work in an office large enough so that they have the kinds of projects where it is no longer a matter of one building, but groups of buildings. On the point of establishing a practice, more and more of the time, our clients are larger institutions, and they are demanding a great many more services from the architect. They are looking not only towards first-rate solutions, but solutions in all the complicated areas that make up the environment. I think that this kind of client will turn towards an office that can provide a variety of services: planning, research, feasibility studies, design, landscaping, specifications, estimating, construction, and engineering, and that a team approach to the practice therefore has merit. The final comments I shall quote come from Robert F. Hastings, president of Smith, Hinchman and Grills, as you know, one of the country's largest architectural firms, and as you may not know, one of the most advanced in the country in exploring the relationship between management and design at the new scale of practice. To me, Mr. Hastings' response was the most interesting of all because it included his assertion that his firm would be very happy to cooperate with any qualified student interested in following the pre-registration program he outlines and with his school, if it were interested. Here is his advice on pre-registration experience objectives. 1, work for a qualified and fully integrated office that can or will give you training in many areas of architecture, engineering, planning, and management. 2, touch every aspect of the planning and the construction process: feasibility and finance, programming, design, working techniques, construction management, follow-up of useful problems, and overall management of a planning or design firm. 3, develop a student school office internship program of 1 to 2 years, generally involving these 3 processes: observe it, do it, improve it. 4, write exam or thesis on internship. 5, be willing to work for a modest salary while going through this program. 6, work with such an office a minimum of 2 or 3 years. As to starting the architectural practice, Mr. Hastings offered these observations. Architectural practice of the future must be keyed to society's needs, not the profession's wishes. Except for a limited number of highly specialized and highly talented design, management, technological consultants, architectural practice will be comprehensive in nature and will be as large as the region can support, but giving quite a range, 5 to several hundred men. 3, with the internship and practical experience suggested in the pre-registration recommendations, the architect is ideally qualified to receive professional registration and enter into practice. Basic ingredients of a successful practice: A, management skills involving human relations, community relations, organization skills. B, creative design skills. C, technological skills. D, personal qualities of integrity, industry, and ingenuity. E, association with a minimum of 2 or 3 compatible professionals, each of whom have a maximum of the basic ingredients of personality and character for a successful practice. Build your practice upon the outstanding qualities of each individual principal. Establish organizational patterns, principles, responsibilities, financial structure, philosophy of practice, and philosophy of design. Keep flexible. Maintain high professional standards of design, practice, and professional integrity. Well, I'm afraid this has been a rather ruthlessly practical talk. But then I think you have some rather ruthlessly practical problems ahead, and not very far ahead. Charles Ness said in the same letter from which I quoted earlier, "I am always pretty frightened to talk to architectural students of this vintage. They are filled with pertinent questions that are very difficult to answer." One such question was asked by a student at the National Student Forum at the AIA last fall. The question was, why can't architects use big business methods and technology as effectively as GM? My answer to your whole generation of architects is, you must.